There's a third possibility, and that is that China and the United States, with all the mechanisms that the strategic economic dialogue between the two countries has established in recent years, are able to coordinate our measures, our responses to the downturn, so that the two of us working together are able to pull out of this crisis more rapidly than we could if we're working at cross purposes with each other. This is significant because I would argue that the United States and China, in terms of the global impact of our economies, are the only two economies that really could significantly help pull the rest of the world along if we were able to shorten the duration and limit the severity of the crisis through coordinated measures. So you can see there are a variety of ways that we could come out of this economic crisis. Some negative, some positive, but all of them having enormous significance, not only for this region, but for the world down the road. Now, faced with these types of challenges, President Obama moved with uncharacteristic speed, even before he took office, to get in place his new governing group, naming them quickly, and Congress has moved rapidly to try to confirm the new cabinet members in their positions. There are one or two, as you know, in which there have been difficulties. There was some disturbing rhetoric during the campaign, especially, as Ambassador Koh noted, in areas affecting free trade orientation of the Obama administration. But he has put in place, both in the foreign policy national security area and in the economic financial team that he's selected, people who are not protectionists, who are not likely to recommend protectionist measures. So it really boils down to whether the executive branch, headed by President Obama, is going to be able to stem off protectionist pressures sufficiently so that we don't go down the path that was followed during the 1930s of making the crisis worse because of yielding to domestic pressures for unwise measures. We will have to wait and see on that. The problem is the administration is really only barely staffed at the very highest levels. One of the very unusual things about Secretary Clinton's visit is she doesn't even have an assistant secretary for East Asia named. A lot of us know who we think it will be, but the person hasn't been nominated yet and certainly hasn't been confirmed, and that means she is traveling to Asia without a set of economic advisors, without a set of East Asia policy advisors in place. Now, there's an additional very unusual thing about this visit. Not only is it very rare for a U.S. Secretary of State to visit Asia at the beginning of an administration. Somebody, I think, mentioned that Dean Rusk may have done this back in the 1960s, but that's already 40 years ago. But she gave a major Asia policy speech before making the trip. Now, this is extraordinary. The Bush administration went through 4 years and hadn't made a major Asia policy speech. And here's the Secretary of State without her advisors on East Asia in place yet, already visiting Asia and making a major Asia policy speech. Now, I was asked in Indonesia when we were meeting there yesterday, this is a cynical question, and the questioner said it was a cynical question. Is she really just coming to Asia because she was blocked out of other regions because somebody's going off to Europe and somebody else is going to the Middle East? So she looks around and she figures, well, might as well go to Asia. And my answer was, nuts. Sure, maybe she had to come to Asia, but she doesn't have to give a major Asia policy speech before coming here. That takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of thought. She is coming here because we are seeing what people have been hoping would be the case, that the Obama administration intends to give more attention to Asia, and the question is Asia ready for this? You have to be careful what you wish for. Now, I think if you read the speech, you will react positively. I read the speech, and it's one of the best foreign policy speeches on Asia that I have seen in recent decades. And the reason I say this is the tone is fundamentally different. This is not a hegemonic power riding its superpower status talking about unilateral action, maintaining our position of number one in the world indefinitely. This is an administration conscious of the challenges we face, talking about partnership with Asian countries, talking about a positive, cooperative relation with China, talking about Japan in a traditional way, stressing the importance of that relationship, but talking about Indonesia in strengthening a strategic partnership that Indonesia itself has proposed in terms of working with the United States. So this is really a different tone from the administration, and to me, put together more attention to Asia and a better tone defining how we are going to approach the region, where cooperation, where working through bilateral and multilateral channels are all built into the mix. This is a very positive combination. Now, we have to wait and see how this plays out. There are lots of challenges in trying to develop these relationships. But if you don't get the language right, it's hard to get your thinking right, because we humans think in terms of language. And one of the problems, in my judgment, with the Bush administration is that they defined our approach to the world in ways that guaranteed that everywhere but in Asia we tended to get things wrong. And so I'm encouraged that there are signs that we're getting things right. Now, what does all this have to do with the Asia Foundation report? I have no idea whether President Obama and Secretary Clinton has read the report. But if she had read the report, she would have given exactly the speech that she gave. So, those of you who are professors of philosophy will say that it's a philosophical error to say that because something happens afterwards, it happened because of something. But I think that we ought to take advantage of that type of thinking and think that if we issued the report and now she has given a speech along the lines of the report, clearly this shows that the people who worked so hard in the report knew what they were doing and have influenced U.S. foreign policy in a very positive way. So, I'm delighted that there is a complementarity between the way the Asian members who participated in the report process and the American members who participated came up with conclusions that seem to be very similar to the conclusions that those people in the Obama administration who have looked at this region think in terms of the direction and the posture we should be adopting toward the region. Another positive factor is there are indications, which we'll have to wait and see, that the administration is prepared to bite the bullet and adhere to the ASEAN Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. Now, that opens all sorts of potential doors. And it also shows that the administration is not simply going to focus on Indonesia in this region, because adhering to the ASEAN Treaty of Amity and Cooperation is a gesture toward the entire region of Southeast Asia, and very important because it's conspicuous that when India, Japan, Russia, Australia all have been able to adhere to the treaty, and the United States has almost seemed to behave as though we hadn't noticed that the treaty existed, this is a very important development. One final factor. In the report, there's a clear reference to the fact that our foreign policy, our strategy toward this region, has to begin at home. The United States has to get our domestic act together if we are going to be able to conduct an effective foreign policy. So there is a clear connection between how the president deals with the negative factor he faces, which is the global economic downturn, and what I would call the positive factor, which is the approach they're taking to Asia, in my judgment, opens up possibilities for strengthening the U.S. role in this region, which will, frankly, benefit every country in the region, specifically including China. Why? Because China's rise is much easier for the rest of Asians to respond to without panicking if the United States is effectively involved in the region and has a positive cooperative relationship with China that is not being pursued at the expense of our traditional relationships with our friends and allies in the region. So therefore, getting this part of it right is good, because China's rise is good if it benefits the Chinese people and doesn't create threats to the regional neighbors of China. So I think we face an unusual opportunity at the same time that we're facing an unusual challenge. It's certainly not a normal occurrence for the United States to have a president who not only spent part of his childhood in Indonesia, but actually speaks Bahasa Indonesia. Sound policies, of course, can't be based on personal relationships. But I think that the recommendations that are in the Asia Foundation report and the line of approach spelled out in Secretary Clinton's speech suggest that they could provide a constructive contribution to sound policy formulation. Thank you.